supervisors. What's the reason for the stop?
I already told you, swerving, no signal.
That's not clear. I want a supervisor, please.
No supervisor's coming.
So you're refusing my request for a supervisor?
I'm the most senior officer out here.
Officer, this is escalating for no reason. I'm FBI.
Yeah, I'm sure you are.
So this traffic stop went bad fast. The patrol officer walked up to the driver's window and started giving commands immediately. He told the driver to open all the windows and stop using his phone. When the driver kept recording, the officer mocked him for it and called him a TikTok weirdo. The driver stayed calm and asked why he was being pulled over. The officer said he already explained it and accused the driver of swerving and failing to signal. The driver asked again because the explanation still wasn't clear, and then he requested a supervisor. The officer refused. He said no supervisor was coming and claimed he was the most senior officer on the road. Then he told the driver he could make his life difficult and said he enjoyed doing that. Quick pause. Where are you watching from? Drop your country or state in the comments. And if you watch these stories because you want to see people stay calm and protect themselves the right way, hit like and subscribe. Now rewind. The driver was Edward Reed, mid-30s, black, professional, and careful with his words. He worked federal law enforcement. He had been driving home in Florida after a long day, staying normal in traffic, not speeding, not acting reckless. When he noticed a patrol car behind him, he got even more careful. He signaled, stayed steady, and then the lights still came on. Edward pulled over cleanly, turned the car off, and kept his hands visible. He didn't start reaching for documents. He waited. He started recording because he wanted a full record of the stop. Officer Darren Klein approached with a hard tone from the start. He focused on control first, not explanation. He kept pushing Edward to stop recording and kept treating basic questions like disrespect. After the supervisor request, Klein escalated. He ordered Edward out of the car. Edward complied slowly and clearly, keeping his hands visible and following instructions. Klein then started a search. He moved through it like he expected to find something serious, not like a normal traffic stop. While searching, he kept pushing accusations, suggesting criminal activity, and questioning Edward's intent, even though Edward wasn't resisting and kept answering in a controlled way. Then Edward told the officer he had a firearm on him. That changed the stop immediately. Klein commanded Edward to raise his hands and treated the disclosure like a threat instead of a legal safety notice. Edward explained he was legally armed and had a Florida carry permit. Klein didn't accept that. He questioned whether the permit was real and kept pressing accusations like Edward was lying. During the search and detention, Edward finally identified himself as FBI and explained that his credentials were on him. Klein still didn't ease up. He said people pretend to be law enforcement and kept Edward detained while he continued checking and searching. Klein took the FBI statement like it was another excuse. He kept Edward detained and kept control of the space while he demanded the credentials. Edward told him where they were and stayed still while Klein retrieved them. Klein checked the ID like he expected it to be fake, then stepped away to verify it through dispatch. Backup arrived while Klein was verifying. The second officer pulled in because of the weapon call and the way Klein had framed the stop. Edward stayed calm, hands visible, and didn't argue with the backup. He kept repeating the same points. He was legally armed, he disclosed it, and he was federal law enforcement. Dispatch confirmed the credentials. That's when Klein's tone changed, but not the attitude. He acknowledged Edward was FBI, then immediately complained that Edward should have said it earlier. Edward responded that he did try, but Klein kept cutting him off and kept escalating before he could get a full sentence out. Klein didn't address the earlier threats or the mocking. He shifted into excuses and warnings. He talked about people pretending to be law enforcement and tried to make the detention sound like normal caution. Then he started undoing the escalation. He told backup they were clear, canceled additional units that were still coming, and stopped treating it like a felony stop. He returned the credentials and moved back toward his cruiser. Edward asked if he was being cited or charged with anything. Klein didn't write a ticket. He didn't give a warning slip. He ended it with a vague statement about driving carefully and then told Edward he was free to go. Edward left without charges, but the stop didn't end clean. Klein looked angry walking away, like he'd been forced to back off, not like he'd realized he crossed a line. After Edward drove off, he didn't just forget it. He pulled into a nearby lot and documented everything while it was fresh: time, location, unit info, what was said, and the order of events. He made sure his recording saved because he already knew how quickly stories get rewritten once reports start. Within an hour of getting home, Edward treated the stop like a formal incident, not a bad interaction. He didn't post it immediately. He didn't call friends to rant. He made copies of the video, saved it in 2 places, and wrote down a clean timeline. When the lights came on, when the officer started issuing commands, when the threats happened, when the search started, when he disclosed the firearm, when he said he was FBI, when dispatch confirmed it, and when he was released. The next morning, Edward did 3 practical things. First, he requested preservation of records. He wanted the officer's body cam, dash cam, dispatch audio, and any CAD notes locked in so nothing could be overwritten or missing. Second, he notified his chain of command, not in an emotional way, just facts. He explained that he was detained at gunpoint level intensity after a legal firearm disclosure, that the officer ignored identification until he felt like verifying it, and that threats were made during the stop. Third, he filed a complaint with the local department's internal affairs. He didn't write a long speech. He listed the statements, the actions, and the outcome. No citation, no charge, no clear basis for the search, and a stop that escalated after he requested a supervisor. Because of who Edward was, this didn't sit in a generic inbox. His supervisor took it seriously, not because Edward was important, but because the stop created risk. A local officer escalating like that against a compliant, legally armed person could get someone hurt, and the threats on camera weren't something a department could easily brush off if it got out. A few days later, Internal Affairs contacted Edward to confirm basic details and request his copy of the recording. Edward agreed, but only after he confirmed they were also preserving their own footage. He wasn't going to hand over the only clean record and hope the rest showed up. At the same time, the department pulled Klein's body cam and dash cam. They also pulled the radio traffic and the backup officer's footage. And when all of that got reviewed together, the pattern was hard to ignore. Klein escalated early over-recording. He made a direct threat about making Edward's life difficult. He refused a supervisor request while claiming nobody outranked him. He pushed criminal accusations without evidence. He treated a legal firearm disclosure like proof of wrongdoing. He doubted federal credentials even after Edward explained what he was and where the ID was. He ended the stop with no ticket and no charge. That last part mattered because it made the reason for the stop look weaker. Departments can defend a tough stop when it ends with a clear violation. It's harder when the officer found nothing and still went that far. Officer Perez also got interviewed because she was backup and she witnessed the later part. She didn't have to call Klein racist or abusive. She only had to confirm the basics. Edward was calm, compliant, and not acting like a threat. Not long after that, the department made quiet moves. Klein was pulled from road duty temporarily while the review continued. No public announcement, just schedule changes, different assignment, less time behind the wheel. Then Edward heard through official channels that the department was treating the complaint as sustained misconduct on at least some points. The biggest one was the threat. Saying you love making people's lives difficult isn't a tone issue. It's an abuse of authority statement, especially during a stop. The firearm part also became a focus. Florida has a lot of lawful carriers, and law enforcement training is supposed to cover safe handling of disclosures without turning every armed citizen into a criminal story. The footage showed Edward disclose calmly, and the escalation still happened. And while the investigation ran, the recording started to spread anyway. Not because Edward chased clout, because somebody always shares it. A clip got out showing the mocking about recording and the threat. It circulated fast because it was simple and clear. Officer mocks a driver for recording, then threatens him, then later finds out he detained FBI. The department went into damage control mode, not panic, just the standard playbook. Say it's under review, say they take conduct seriously, avoid details, and wait for the storm to pass. But this one didn't fully pass because the evidence was too clean and the ending was too obvious. No charges. The department couldn't ignore it for long, not with internal affairs already involved, and a clip circulating that showed the threat and the attitude. Klein got called in for a formal interview, not a casual talk. A recorded statement with policies in front of him. They went through it in order: why he stopped the car, why he escalated over the phone recording, why he refused a supervisor request, why he threatened to make the driver's life difficult, why he searched, and why he kept pushing criminal accusations after finding nothing. Klein tried the usual defenses. He leaned on officer safety. He leaned on driver was argumentative. He leaned on I didn't know who he was. He leaned on people impersonate law enforcement. But none of those answers covered the threat. None of them explained the mocking. None of them explained why a traffic stop ended with no citation, but still turned into a detention with backup. And the recordings didn't match his tone on paper. Internal affairs didn't need to prove what was in his head. They only needed to document what he said and did. That's enough for policy violations. The outcome wasn't some movie ending. It was the kind of accountability that actually happens. Klein received discipline for conduct during the stop. The threat line became the center of it because it was clear and it was recorded. He was removed from solo road duty for a period and reassigned. Training and review were ordered, not optional. His stops and Bodycam usage were flagged for closer supervision for a while after. At the same time, the department made small policy adjustments that looked like training updates, but they were a response to this exact incident. Officers were reminded that civilians can record and that it's not a reason to escalate. Supervisors weren't allowed to be unavailable just because an officer didn't want oversight. Firearm disclosure procedures were emphasized again, especially in a state where legal carry is common. Edward didn't treat that as a victory parade. He treated it like a case closing. He kept everything: his recording, the timeline, the complaint number, and every email. He also made it clear through his chain of command that he wasn't asking for special treatment. He was asking for the same thing any driver should get: a lawful stop, clear communication, and no threats. The interagency part stayed tense. Klein didn't reach out to apologize. There wasn't any "we're all on the same team" moment. What Edward got was something more useful: a documented record that the stop was handled wrong and a change in how that officer was allowed to operate. And that mattered because it wasn't just about Edward. If Klein talked like that to a federal agent on camera, there was no reason to believe he was calmer with regular people who didn't have credentials or a chain of command behind them. That's why the paperwork mattered. That's why the recordings mattered. That's why Edward didn't let it end at "you're free to go." The last piece was what Edward did publicly. He didn't dump a full video online with a dramatic caption. He shared what needed to be shared when it made sense, and he kept it focused on conduct and procedure, not personal attacks, not internet revenge. The point was simple: recording is protection, and threats from authority should never be treated as normal. So here's the question for you. If you were Edward, would you have kept recording and stayed calm the same way? Or would you have reacted differently when the officer started mocking and threatening you? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And if you want more real modern stories where people hold their ground the right way, make sure you subscribe.
Stand up. Need your ID.
What is wrong?
Just give me your identification.
What's the legal reason you need it?
You're too suspicious. I'm not going back and forth. Stand up, now.
I'm requesting a supervisor. Right now.
A local officer thought he could walk into a quiet downtown cafe, single out a black man minding his own business, and demand identification like it was a personal right. What he didn't know was that the calm man at the window table wasn't just another customer he could pressure into complying. He was the head of internal affairs, and every step the officer took was about to become evidence. And before we jump in, we just want to say, we're genuinely grateful you chose to spend your time with us today. Your support is what keeps this channel going. Now tell us where you're watching from in the comments, your country, your city, your state. And if you like stories where arrogance meets cameras, policy, and real consequences, hit like and subscribe, because this one ends with careers, charges, and a sentence nobody expected. So here's what happened. It was a weekday morning downtown. The cafe was the kind of place packed with laptops and quiet conversations 2 blocks from the courthouse, with security cameras in plain sight. People were in work clothes, students were studying, and the staff were moving fast behind the counter. Malcolm Pierce sat alone near the front window. He was black, late 40s, dressed like any other professional on a day off. Coffee on the table, laptop open, phone set to the side. Nothing loud, nothing confrontational. Just a man using a public space the way everyone else was. Malcolm also happened to be the head of internal affairs for the city's police department, but nobody in that cafe knew that, and Malcolm made sure it stayed that way. Officer Tyler Grady walked in without ordering anything. He didn't scan the pastry case or check the line. He scanned people. He moved with the attitude of someone used to turning normal situations into contacts that looked productive on paper. He locked onto Malcolm and went straight to the table. Grady demanded identification immediately without giving a clear reason. He positioned himself close enough that Malcolm couldn't stand up and leave without bumping into him. That body positioning mattered because it quietly turned a casual demand into a controlled space. Malcolm didn't argue and he didn't raise his voice. He didn't reach into his pockets. He kept his hands visible on the table and asked one clean question that forces accountability, whether he was being detained or free to leave. Grady avoided answering. Instead, he repeated the ID demand and treated Malcolm's question like disrespect. Then Grady tried to justify it after the fact. He claimed Malcolm looked suspicious. He implied Malcolm matched a description. He suggested the cafe had concerns. The problem was the room itself didn't match the story. The staff looked confused, not relieved. The customers looked uncomfortable, not protected. And the cafe manager, Asha Moreno, stepped out from behind the counter and watched closely because she could tell this wasn't a response to a call. It was an officer creating a reason in real time. Malcolm stayed in the same calm posture. He asked what specific facts supported the demand. He asked what legal cause existed. Grady escalated by shifting to control language. He treated Malcolm's refusal to hand over ID as non-compliance, even though there was no clear lawful basis stated for the demand. He warned Malcolm that refusing would lead to consequences. That was the first major procedural mistake, trying to convert a voluntary request into a forced demand without articulable cause. Grady then moved the encounter toward detention without doing the one thing that makes detention lawful, stating specific, checkable facts tied to a crime. He kept it vague on purpose because vague sounds safe in the moment. Vague also collapses later when video exists, and video did exist. Grady's body camera was on. The cafe's security cameras covered the seating area from multiple angles. Asha knew exactly where those cameras pointed and how long footage stayed stored. She quietly noted the time in which cameras had a clean view of the table. A barista named Eli Tran also noticed the pattern. He saw an officer crowding a seated customer, heard the tone, and watched the officer refuse to explain the stop. Eli didn't want to get involved directly, but he did what a lot of people do now when they feel something is off. He pulled out his phone and started recording audio discreetly while keeping his distance. Grady tried another pressure tactic. He told Malcolm to stand up. Malcolm didn't stand. He stayed controlled and asked for a supervisor. Grady brushed past that and acted like his own authority was enough. Then Asha stepped closer and made it clear in a manager's tone that Malcolm was a paying customer and that staff had not requested police intervention. She didn't challenge the officer emotionally. She challenged the basis of the officer being there. Grady responded by dismissing her input and continuing the stop anyway. That was the moment the encounter shifted from questionable to openly reckless, because Grady was now overriding the very business concern he had implied earlier. The excuse stopped matching the reality in the room, and the cameras captured that mismatch clearly. Malcolm still didn't reveal who he was. He could have ended it instantly by identifying himself. But Malcolm understood something most people never get to use. The best accountability case is the one where the officer can't claim he was treated differently because of rank. So Malcolm let the officer keep choosing his own steps. Grady then called for backup and described the situation in a way that made Malcolm sound like a problem. He used language that would prime the next officer to arrive ready to handle someone, not to evaluate legality. That was another procedural violation starting to form, creating a misleading narrative over the radio to justify actions already taken. Within minutes, a second unit arrived. The responding officer walked in, looked at the scene, an officer standing over a calm, seated man, a manager nearby, a room full of witnesses, cameras on the ceiling, and hesitated just long enough to show he wasn't fully buying what he'd been told. Grady didn't like that hesitation. He immediately pushed for physical control, instructing the responding officer to help him force the situation forward. Malcolm didn't go back to the cafe. He didn't call the precinct from the street. He handled it the way he expected any resident to handle it, because he wanted the process to be clean. That afternoon, he wrote a timeline while it was still fresh. He listed the time window, the exact location, what Grady did first, what Grady claimed as justification, how the justification changed, when Grady called for backup, when the physical contact started, and when the supervisor ended it. He kept it factual and short. Then he filed a formal complaint through the public intake channel. He also sent a preservation request. He requested the full body camera files for Grady and the assisting officer, the dispatch audio, CAD logs, GPS pings, supervisor communications, and any in-car video tied to the units that arrived. He specified the full time window, not just the few minutes outside. That mattered because a lot of cases got shaped by missing context. Malcolm wasn't giving anyone room to trim the story. At the cafe, Asha did what she said she would do. She pulled the footage from every camera with a view of Malcolm's table, the aisle, the entrance, and the sidewalk. She saved a longer segment than most people would, starting before Grady entered and ending after the supervisor left. She also wrote her own statement while it was fresh and got contact info from 2 customers who said they'd confirm what they saw. Eli saved his audio recording and gave it to Asha so it could be stored with the cafe footage instead of sitting on a personal phone. 2 days later, Grady submitted his report. It was the kind of report that tried to make the stop sound routine and lawful. It leaned on vague suspicion. It referenced a description without details. It described Malcolm as non-compliant. It emphasized resisting to justify going hands-on. It also included the trespass angle, even though the manager had rejected that in real time. The complaint would normally have been routed for a standard review first. Malcolm made sure that didn't happen. Not by taking control of the case, but by doing the opposite. He disclosed internally that he was the complainant, and he formally recused himself in writing. He assigned the investigation to his deputy, Raymond Holt, with clear instructions. Run it like any other citizen complaint, document everything, and do not treat it as a special case in either direction. Holt opened the file and immediately treated it like a case that could turn into a lawsuit or a federal issue. First, he issued evidence holds. He locked down the Bodycam file's dispatch data and any related digital logs, so nothing could be overwritten. Second, he collected the cafe footage directly from Asha and documented chain of custody. He didn't accept a text message clip. He took the original exports from the system with timestamps. Third, he pulled the body camera files and compared them against the cafe angles. That comparison created the first clear problem. The cafe footage showed the approach, the lack of a clear stated reason, the manager contradicting any business complaint, and Malcolm staying controlled. It also showed the moment Grady went hands-on, and it showed how quickly Grady labeled it resisting. Grady's body camera captured the sound and general sequence, but the angle got worse during the most important outside portion. Holt noted it, then requested the file metadata and the audit logs. He wanted to know if the file had been edited, re-uploaded, trimmed, or processed in any way outside normal procedure. At the same time, Holt reviewed Grady's recent activity because the language in the report looked familiar. It used the same phrases that showed up in other complaints: suspicious behavior, matched description, refusing lawful orders, consent, resisting. Holt pulled Grady's stop history for the last year and filtered it by location and unit. The number of contacts was high compared to other officers working the same downtown area. The number of stops that resulted in actual charges was low. The number of searches marked as consent was unusually high. That didn't prove anything by itself, but it told Holt where to look next. He pulled a sample of past incidents tied to Grady and the same small cluster of officers in that downtown unit. He matched them to any available video, any citizen recordings, and any prior complaints that had been closed. Then he started seeing the same pattern over and over. Stops justified with vague descriptions. Reports that sounded polished, but didn't include specific facts. Bodycam issues that seemed to happen during the critical moments. People being labeled as resisting when the video didn't show aggression. One case had a report claiming a man agreed to a search, but the audio didn't show a clear agreement. Another case had a report claiming a woman made a threatening movement, but the video showed her hands up. Another case had a camera malfunction that began right before an alleged discovery. Holt documented each discrepancy. He didn't jump to conclusions. He built a list. Then he received the audit logs related to Grady's Bodycam file from the cafe incident. The logs showed access and handling that didn't match standard workflow. The file had been opened and processed more than once before it was officially turned over for review. Holt flagged it immediately. That was the first moment the case shifted from a bad stop to a potential evidence issue. Holt briefed command staff with a summary that stayed clean and professional. Clear contradictions between report and video, concerns about body cam handling, and indicators that this might not be an isolated event. Command staff tried to contain it at first. They discussed quick discipline, retraining, and moving Grady out of downtown. Holt shut that down by pointing to the evidence handling concerns. If evidence was being manipulated, internal fixes weren't enough. Holt scheduled formal interviews. Asha, Eli, the two customers, the assisting officer, the supervisor, and Grady. Grady's interview followed the same line as his report. He insisted the stop was lawful. He repeated the vague justification. He emphasized resisting. When Holt pressed for specifics, Grady couldn't provide clear details that matched the footage. Holt also asked about the camera angle shift outside. Grady said it was incidental. Holt didn't argue. He logged the answer, then logged the audit data that suggested the file had been handled in a way that required explanation. By the end of the second week, Holt had enough to take the next step without guessing. He prepared a referral package focused on two things: pattern indicators tied to the downtown unit and possible evidence handling violations connected to Grady's camera files. That package didn't accuse. It presented facts, comparisons, and timestamps. Holt didn't send a vague summary up the chain. He sent a tight packet. It had the cafe security timestamps, the Bodycam timestamps, the dispatch log, and the exact places where Grady's report didn't match what the cameras showed. It also included the Bodycam handling logs that showed the file was accessed and processed more than it should have been before it was turned over for review. Once that packet landed, The department couldn't treat this like a normal complaint. Command staff pulled in legal counsel and ordered a review of the downtown proactive unit, not just Grady. They requested stop data, search rates, complaint history, and body cam availability for the entire unit over a defined period. They tried the usual first move, quiet containment. Grady was pulled off the street and placed on administrative duty pending investigation. The department also ordered him not to discuss the case and not to access any related files. Holt kept building the case on proof, not opinions. He interviewed Asha and secured the original security exports with chain of custody documentation. He took Eli's audio file and logged it the same way. He interviewed the assisting officer and documented that Grady's radio framing didn't match what the assisting officer saw upon arrival. He interviewed Sergeant Klein and documented that Klein ended the stop because the justification wasn't holding and the situation was becoming a public problem. Then Holt went wider. He pulled a sample of prior stops from Grady and the same unit. He compared reports to any available video and dispatch logs. The pattern showed up fast. Vague justifications repeated across stops, high consent search claims, low actual charges, and video gaps or malfunctions during key moments. He also found repeated report language that looked copied and reused, like officers were writing from a script instead of documenting real specific facts. In several cases, the scripted language didn't match video. That's when the risk changed. This wasn't just a bad stop. It looked like a unit practice. Holt escalated again, this time with a second referral, focused on constitutional violations and evidence handling issues. He didn't label it as criminal in the memo. He laid out facts and logs that made outside review unavoidable. When outside investigators requested records, the tone inside the department shifted immediately. Supervisors got cautious. Officers stopped talking freely. Command staff started holding meetings with lawyers present. Grady reacted badly. He complained that he was being targeted, tried to figure out who filed the cafe complaint, and kept assuming it was some guy trying to make trouble. He still didn't know it was Malcolm, and Malcolm still stayed fully recused. So nobody could claim this was personal. By the end of the month, multiple members of the downtown unit were under review. Some were reassigned, some were suspended. Supervisors were being questioned about how reports were approved without verifying video. The first real break didn't come from a confession. It came from records. Federal investigators lined up 3 things across stops tied to Grady's downtown unit: dispatch data, body cam availability, and the wording in reports. They were looking for repeat contradictions, not one-off mistakes. They found them fast. They found reports claiming calls for service when dispatch showed no call. They found matched description language with no description that could be verified. They found repeated consent search claims where audio didn't show clear consent and where people were asking if they had a choice and not getting a straight answer. Then they focused on files. The cafe incident was the cleanest example because there were 2 independent recordings: the officer's body cam and the cafe's security system. When investigators compared them, the timeline held, but the most important moment had a problem. The body cam angle got worse right when Grady went hands-on. The cafe footage stayed clear the entire time. Investigators pulled evidence handling policy and compared it to what the log showed for the body cam file. The file had a handling trail that didn't match normal workflow. It showed access and processing outside the standard review path before the footage was officially requested through the complaint. That pushed the case from policy violations into evidence issues. They went back to older stops tied to the same unit and found similar patterns. Not every stop had missing footage, but enough did, and the gaps clustered around the exact moments that mattered: searches, handcuffs, and resisting claims. The reports also used the same wording over and over, like they were written from a shared script. Federal agents interviewed civilians who had filed older complaints and never heard back. Some still had phone videos, some had screenshots. Some had paperwork from detentions that never led to charges. The stories were consistent: vague reasons, pressure tactics, and then reports that made it sound lawful afterward. Then they interviewed officers. A junior officer gave a practical statement. The unit had a habit of keeping report language consistent, and certain officers would help clean up reports so supervisors wouldn't question them. Investigators didn't build the case on that statement alone. They used it to target proof. They subpoenaed internal communications, draft histories were available, access logs, and supervisor approval patterns. They looked for who touched reports before submission and who approved without checking video. That's where they found the messages that mattered. Discussion about keeping reports tight, making sure wording matched, and concern about the cafe incident becoming a thing. It wasn't a movie-style confession. It was enough to show intent to manage the record. Then Grady did the worst possible thing while under review. He was on administrative duty and under orders not to access related files. He attempted access anyway. The system logged it with his credentials and a timestamp. It wasn't someone's opinion, it was a record. That became the clean evidence tampering lane, violating access restrictions during an active investigation tied to footage already backed up by a private business system. Once that was in place, the department moved to protect itself. Grady was terminated. The downtown unit as it existed was shut down and restructured. Supervisors who approved the reports without verification were removed from that chain pending review. The city publicly confirmed cooperation with federal investigators because it was past the point where they could pretend it was contained. Now, the federal case took center stage. The U.S. Attorney's Office filed charges focused on civil rights violations and evidence tampering. The civil rights side targeted unlawful detentions and stops built on race-based suspicion and vague justifications. The evidence side targeted the attempts to interfere with Bodycam handling and the pattern of report falsification tied to video gaps. When the case went public, Malcolm's name finally entered the story, not because he announced himself in the cafe, but because paperwork and sworn filings made it unavoidable. The irony was obvious. The person Grady tried to bully into handing over ID was the person responsible for investigating officers who violated policy and law. The defense tried the standard approach. They argued Grady acted in good faith. They claimed the footage didn't show everything. They tried to frame the body cam angle shift as accidental. They pointed to officer discretion and said the stops were based on training and experience. The prosecution kept it simple. They played the cafe footage next to the body cam footage and let the jury watch the story change in real time. They showed the manager contradicting the business concern angle. They showed the lack of a stated crime. They showed the escalation when Malcolm asked basic legal questions. They showed how resisting was claimed without matching behavior. Then they showed the logs, file access that didn't follow policy, access attempts during investigation, and messages that showed people were thinking about controlling the narrative. They also brought in the pattern evidence. Multiple stops with the same vague language, the same consent claims, the same report style, and the same convenient video problems. That's what made it bigger than one incident. The jury wasn't asked to decide whether Grady had a bad day. They were shown a method. Grady was convicted. At sentencing, the judge didn't treat it like a paperwork issue. The judge treated it like what it was: abuse of authority backed by falsified documentation, aimed at people who were targeted because they were easy to target until the day the wrong person sat at the wrong table with cameras everywhere. Grady received 15 years in federal prison, not probation, not a short sentence. 15 years. After the sentencing, the fallout continued. The city settled several civil lawsuits tied to the unit's stops. The department implemented stricter stop documentation rules and mandatory body cam audits with random reviews. Supervisors were required to verify video before approving reports in certain categories of stops. The downtown unit's mandate changed, and the oversight structure changed with it. Internally, the case became a training example, not the sanitized kind. the kind that shows exactly how a stop becomes unlawful step by step, and how I can do what I want turns into I can't explain what I did. Malcolm never needed to embarrass anyone in public to prove a point. He handled it through process, evidence, and a clean chain of documentation. He let the system record its own failure, then forced it to face the record. And if you're watching this thinking about how often people are told to just comply and deal with it later, here's the reality. Later only works when there's proof. And proof only exists when someone preserves it and the process isn't allowed to bury it. What would you have done in that cafe? Would you have argued? Would you have recorded? Would you have walked out and hoped it ended? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and if you've seen something like this in your own city, share what happened. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and stick with us for more stories where accountability actually lands.
Stop right there. You fit a description.
A description of what? What law are you saying I broke?
Don't worry about that. Just cooperate.
I'm asking for the legal reason you're stopping me.
Turn around. Put your hands behind your back.
I want the reason for this detention documented. I'm requesting a supervisor.
You're not in charge here.
Officer, listen carefully. I'm James Haynes. I'm a federal...
The first thing the body camera picked up wasn't a crime. It was an officer trying to force a story. Officer Caleb Rudd stopped James Haynes in a strip mall parking lot and immediately treated him like he'd been caught doing something. Rudd kept repeating one line that officers lean on when they don't want to explain themselves. James fit a description, no details, no specific crime, no clear reason for why James was being questioned or why the situation was turning into a detention. James did what most people think you should do in that moment. He stayed calm, answered basic questions, and asked one simple thing back. What's the legal reason for this stop? Rudd didn't give one. Instead, he acted like James asking questions was the problem. The more James tried to keep it normal, the more Rudd pushed it toward control. And within minutes, Rudd was talking like the arrest was already decided, like the outcome didn't depend on facts, only on James's compliance. That's what made this incident different. The body cam didn't just show what happened. It showed how quickly an assumption turned into force, and how a vague excuse was used to justify everything that came after. And then it got worse. Because Rudd didn't just detain James. He arrested him right there in the parking lot, while still refusing to clearly explain what law James had broken. And when James finally identified himself as a high-ranking federal official, Rudd mocked him on camera like it was a joke. That's the moment this went from another stop to something that could end a career. Tell me where you're watching from, state or country. And if you watch stories where cameras and accountability expose abuse of power, hit like and subscribe. Now let's rewind to how it started. It was late afternoon in Millstone, Georgia. James was walking across the lot toward his car. Nothing about what he was doing was illegal or unusual. Rudd pulled in and approached him like James didn't belong there and like the car couldn't possibly be his. James said the car was his. Rudd didn't accept it. He said James matched a description and started pressing him about why he was in that area and why he was near that vehicle. James asked what the description was and what he was being stopped for. Rudd kept it vague and didn't give a clear answer. That vagueness mattered. It meant Rudd was demanding compliance without giving James enough information to understand what he was even being accused of. James asked again for the legal reason and asked for a supervisor. Rudd treated that as not cooperating and escalated. Rudd put James in handcuffs during the stop. James didn't resist. He complied for safety, but he made it clear he wanted the reason for the detention, and the supervisor request documented. While being detained, James identified himself as a federal law enforcement executive. Rudd openly doubted him and mocked the claim instead of verifying first. James didn't argue back and didn't threaten. He pushed for dispatch verification. Dispatch took the information and started checking it. Rudd acted like it was a waste of time, like he already knew the truth. He kept James in cuffs and kept talking as if the verification was just another excuse James invented. Then the confirmation started coming back. You could hear the shift before Rudd admitted it. His voice changed, because dispatch wasn't treating it like a joke. They asked follow-up questions that only come up when the name and title match real records. They didn't say no match. They didn't say unknown. They treated it like a real identity that needed proper confirmation. Rudd tried to keep control anyway. He kept the cuffs on. He kept acting like he could still justify the stop if he talked fast enough. He started repeating the same vague reason again. James fit a description, but now he was saying it like a defense, not a fact. James didn't escalate. He didn't threaten. He didn't argue about Rudd's attitude. He just stayed on the point. There was no clear reason for the stop, no clear reason for the detention, and this was all being recorded. Dispatch came back with enough certainty that Rudd couldn't bluff anymore. The verification was real. James wasn't pretending. He wasn't guessing. He wasn't using a fake title to scare a small-town officer. He was exactly who he said he was. That's when Rudd's whole approach flipped. He stopped sounding confident and started sounding worried. He began talking like he wanted to rewind time. He tried to explain himself and soften it, like the problem was a misunderstanding instead of a baseless escalation. He started apologizing, not with accountability, with panic. The kind of apology that happens when someone realizes the wrong person is in cuffs and the record of it is locked in official footage. James didn't accept the emotional performance. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't insult Rudd. He stayed controlled and made the point that mattered. Rudd didn't need James's title to know he had no valid reason to arrest him. Rudd took the cuffs off fast. He started talking about procedure and being careful and calls we've had, trying to paint the stop as normal policing. But the body cam already showed the sequence. Vague claim, push for control, arrest without clear cause, then panic only after verification. A supervisor arrived late, because that's how it usually goes. Sergeant Lila Barrett stepped into a scene that was already burned into digital evidence. Rudd tried to brief her in a way that protected himself. He framed it like he was just checking something, and it got cleared up. Barrett didn't have the luxury of pretending it was nothing because James wasn't just mad. He was precise. He asked for names, badge numbers, the case number for the stop, the reason code for the detention. He asked how the description was generated and where it came from. Simple questions that expose whether the stop was real or improvised. Barrett tried to smooth it out. She tried the friendly tone. She tried the "we're sorry you felt disrespected" type language that departments use when they want the moment to end without admitting fault. James didn't play along. He made it clear he wanted the footage preserved, and he wanted the stop reviewed as a formal complaint, not handled as an awkward conversation in a parking lot. And before he left, he delivered one line that stayed with them because it was simple and hard to argue with. Rudd treated him like a threat until dispatch said he had a title. That was the whole case. James didn't treat it like a personal insult he needed to get over. He treated it like an official failure that needed a record. That night, he wrote down the timeline while it was fresh. Where it happened, the time window, what Rudd claimed, when the handcuffs went on, when dispatch verified his identity, when the supervisor arrived. He didn't add opinions. He wrote it like a report, because he knew exactly what departments do when facts are fuzzy. They rewrite them. The next morning, James filed a formal records request and a formal complaint. He asked for specific items, not whatever you have. He requested the full body cam video from Rudd, unedited, any other responding officer footage, the dispatch audio and CAD log for the incident, the stated description Rudd relied on, and the call that generated it, the incident report, and any supplemental notes, SARS, the policy sections Rudd claimed he was enforcing. That detail forced the department into a corner. If they delayed, it looked like a cover-up. If they complied, the footage would show exactly what happened. At first, the department tried to handle it the way small departments often do, quiet, informal, contained. A couple of phone calls. Let's talk this out. A suggestion that it was a misunderstanding. James didn't do the friendly meeting. He kept it on paper. He also asked for a review of Rudd's stop history and complaint history. Not rumors. Actual documentation. Traffic stops, pedestrian stops, use of force reports, and citizen complaints tied to Rudd's badge number. That's when the department's mood changed. Because a single bad stop is something they can try to spin as training. A pattern is something they can't. Over the next 2 weeks, the footage came in, along with the logs. The body cam showed the most damaging parts clearly. The vague, fit a description, the refusal to explain, the quick move into control, the arrest without a clear stated crime, and the tone change only after dispatch confirmed James's identity. James didn't post it himself. He didn't need to. He forwarded everything to an attorney, Nia Kincaid, who treated it like a case from day one. Kincaid didn't start with social media. She started with policy and records. The department resisted parts of it. They tried the standard move, privacy excuses, partial releases, delays, but James's request wasn't coming from someone guessing. It was built to force compliance. Then, the internal review produced something the town couldn't dismiss. Rudd had been complained about before, not once, multiple times. The complaints followed the same shape. Stops based on not belonging, vague suspicion, escalation when questioned, and a tendency to treat black drivers and pedestrians as automatically dishonest. Some complaints hadn't been formally sustained, but the wording was familiar. A pattern of reports that were always inconclusive, always insufficient, always filed away. And there were notes showing supervisors knew he was a problem and kept him on the street anyway. Not because they had proof he was clean, but because dealing with it would mean admitting the department had been ignoring it. Once Kincaid had enough, she made it real. She sent a notice to preserve evidence and warned them not to delete or overwrite footage. She referenced the timestamps, the CAD entry, the specific Bodycam file ID. She basically told them, if anything goes missing, it becomes another case. That's when Officer Rudd got pulled off patrol. At first it was labeled Administrative Leave Pending Review, because departments always try to make it sound neutral. But in town, people noticed quickly. The same officer who used to sit in that strip mall lot wasn't there anymore. And then the story leaked anyway. Not because James went hunting for attention, because witnesses were already there that day. Somebody recorded a piece of it on a phone. Somebody told a family member. Somebody posted a short clip with the claim that a black man got cuffed for walking to his own car. When the clip started moving, the department didn't control the narrative anymore. Now it wasn't just James versus Rudd. It was the footage versus the department. After the stop, James filed a formal complaint and requested the body cam footage, dispatch logs, and the stated description Officer Rudd claimed. The department tried to keep it quiet and slow walk it, but a short witness clip from the parking lot showed up online and spread through local groups. Once it went public, people in town split fast. Some defended Rudd as doing his job. Others pointed out the same thing the footage showed. Rudd treated James as suspicious first, and only changed his tone after dispatch verified who James was. More residents started sharing similar experiences with Rudd. Vague, fit-a-description stops, aggressive detention when questioned, and complaints that went nowhere. That forced the police chief to respond publicly, but the department's statements stayed generic. Under review, we take it seriously, wait for the facts. The problem was the facts were already recorded. By the end of that week, the issue wasn't just the parking lot arrest anymore. It was the department's pattern, prior complaints, weak supervision, and a system that only reacted once the wrong person got targeted, and the video was impossible to ignore. After the clip spread, the department tried to contain it with generic statements and behind-the-scenes outreach. They wanted a quiet conversation before it turned into a formal case. James didn't do informal meetings. Through his attorney, Nia Kincaid, he kept everything on record and demanded the basics: the full body cam footage, dispatch logs, the exact description Rudd claimed, and the justification for the detention and arrest. When those records were reviewed, the department couldn't produce a solid, specific basis that matched what happened on camera. The internal investigation then expanded from one bad stop to supervision and history, because the paperwork showed Rudd had prior complaints and questionable stops that had been minimized or closed without real action. By the end of this phase, Rudd was pulled deeper into an official review, and the department was under pressure to either discipline him seriously or admit they'd ignored a pattern for years. The internal review didn't end with another vague training issue. It got forced into a decision. The body cam footage, dispatch logs, and Rudd's report were compared side by side. The department couldn't keep pretending it was a normal stop that simply went sideways. The timeline showed the stop started on suspicion without a clear, specific reason, then escalated when James asked basic questions, and ended only after identity verification made the mistake impossible to deny. That created two problems for the department. One, the stop and arrest didn't have a clean legal basis on record. Two, Rudd's written explanation didn't match the best evidence. Once that second issue showed up, it stopped being about tone. It became about whether the officer's paperwork could be trusted. Chief Harold Baines had to choose: protect the department's image short-term or protect the department legally long-term. Quietly keeping Rudd would mean future cases could get challenged using this incident. Prosecutors hate officers with credibility issues. Civil attorneys love them. So the department moved. Rudd was called in for a formal interview. He tried to defend himself, the way officers often do when the facts are bad, by leaning on general terms: officer safety, suspicious behavior, refusal to comply. But those phrases didn't line up cleanly with what was actually recorded. The more he talked, the more it sounded like he was trying to justify a decision he made early. Then they pulled his history again, with fresh eyes. Stops with vague reasons, complaints that matched the same pattern, supervisors who wrote notes but never escalated discipline. The town had treated it like, that's just how he is. Now it was a documented liability. At the same time, Kincaid pushed hard on the department's exposure. She made it clear they weren't only looking at Rudd. They were looking at the department's failure to act on earlier warnings. That's what turns a case from an incident into a practice. Baines tried one more containment move. He offered policy changes and a private resolution, but Kincaid tied any resolution to real consequences and an official finding, not a handshake. By the end of the review period, the department did what small departments do when they need to show action without admitting the whole culture is broken. They prepared to discipline Rudd publicly and frame it as an exception. Rudd was notified that his conduct during the stop, the escalation, and the arrest decision were under sustained findings. The department also flagged inconsistencies between his report and the footage as a separate issue. That's when Rudd finally realized something. The badge wasn't going to save him. The recording was stronger than his version of events. After the investigation, the department issued sustained findings tied to the stop and arrest, and they moved to remove Officer Caleb Rudd from the street. Internally, they treated it as a damage control decision. Rudd had become a liability because the body cam footage and logs didn't support his justification, and his report didn't match the recording clearly enough to defend him. Rudd was either pushed to resign or face termination, and the department prepared a decertification referral to the State Standards Board, so he couldn't quietly move to the next agency without the incident following him. At the same time, James and his attorney made it clear they weren't accepting a simple bad officer explanation. They demanded the department address the pattern that allowed repeated complaints to be ignored, including supervision failures and stop documentation practices. This set up the next phase: whether the town would accept real policy changes and oversight, or just remove one officer and keep everything else the same. In the weeks after Rudd was removed, the incident didn't fade. It spread through the region because people recognized the pattern: a vague stop, fast escalation, then excuses after the fact. James's attorney collected additional statements from residents who had had similar encounters and used them to show the problem wasn't isolated. That pressure pushed the town into public meetings, records disclosures, and formal questions about complaint handling and supervision. The department started making short-term changes to reduce blowback. More supervisor involvement on stops that turn into cuffs, stricter report review, and clearer rules about when fit a description is valid versus when it's just a cover for bias. For James, the short-term aftermath was simple. He got validation on paper, not just apologies. And he made sure the case stayed official so it couldn't be quietly buried. Now here's the question for you. If you were James, would you have stayed quiet after the apology, or would you have requested the footage and pushed for a full review? And if you've ever had a stop where the reason stayed vague, what happened after? Drop your thoughts in the comments, share the story with someone who needs it, and subscribe for more real modern stories where accountability actually lands.
Step out now! Hands where I can see them!
My baby. I'm not stepping outside till you tell me the legal basis, show the warrant.
Don't argue, just come out!
No. Show the warrant first. You're pointing guns at a family at the wrong address unless you prove otherwise.
Refusing is gonna make this worse.
That's not how it works. You don't get compliance first and paper.
Robert Reed stood in his front hallway in nothing but boxers, one arm tight around his baby, the other hand held out and empty, so nobody could pretend they saw something. Outside, multiple police officers had flooded his driveway with flashlights and rifles up, shouting commands and ordering him to come out immediately. They still hadn't clearly explained why they were there, and they were acting like his questions were a problem instead of a right. Nia Reed stayed half a step behind him, steady and awake in the way only someone gets when their house is suddenly treated like a target. She kept repeating the same demand. They needed to see the search warrant before anyone stepped closer, before anyone touched the door, before anyone pointed another weapon toward a family holding a child. The officers tried to run the usual pressure play. They pushed urgency. They implied refusal would look bad. They acted like warrants weren't something they had to show in the moment. They tried to turn a legal request into non-compliance. Robert didn't argue like a scared man. He argued like someone trained to hear tactics in every sentence. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't step outside. He kept forcing the same simple question. What's the legal basis? And where's the warrant? And while they were trying to control the scene with intimidation, Robert and Nia were doing something else, quietly controlling the record, because their security cameras were already recording every officer, every command, every weapon angle, and every choice. Quick thing, where are you watching from? Drop your state or country in the comments. And if you like stories where power gets checked by cameras, paperwork, and people who stay calm, hit like and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Now rewind, because this wasn't some random argument on a front lawn. Robert Reed was an FBI agent, not a former anything, not someone pretending. He worked cases that required patience, documentation, and knowing exactly how quickly a bad assumption can ruin lives. He and Nia also had a newborn, which meant their nights were already short and their instincts already sharp. They lived in a quiet neighborhood where nothing usually happened after midnight. People here complained about trash pickup and parking, not tactical teams. The Reeds had cameras because it was normal in 2026 to have them, but also because Robert believed in one rule. If someone in authority makes a mistake, the only thing that keeps the truth from getting rewritten later is video and paperwork. That night, a loud bang hit their front door hard enough to wake both adults instantly. Nia checked the baby first. Robert went to the entryway and saw flashing lights and silhouettes moving fast. Through the glass, he caught the outline of weapons and body armor. Within seconds, the officers were giving commands like they were already convinced they had the right house, the right person, and the right to escalate. And the entire situation turned into a test. Would the Reeds get bullied into stepping outside and surrendering control of the moment? Or would they force the officers to follow procedure on camera before anything went further? Once Robert said clearly and without attitude that he was a federal agent and that he wanted the warrant shown before anything else happened, the officers couldn't keep treating him like a confused civilian. They still tried, but it started getting messy. The lead officer kept pushing the same strategy. Get Robert outside first, then sort out details later. He kept repeating that Robert had to step out, had to comply, had to stop asking questions. He kept implying that asking for paperwork was the same as refusing orders. Robert didn't take that bait. He kept his hands open and visible and kept the baby tight against his chest in a way that made it impossible for anyone to claim Robert was aggressive without sounding ridiculous. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't lecture. He just forced the scene to stay in one lane: legal authority, documentation, and address verification. Nia did the same thing, but from a different angle. She didn't engage the lead officer's ego at all. She didn't let the conversation turn into personalities. She kept repeating that the officers were at a private residence, pointing weapons at a family, and they still hadn't shown a warrant. She also kept reminding them the cameras were recording. That camera reminder changed the officer's body language more than any argument could have. Because once officers realize the story isn't going to be written by whoever files the report first, they start thinking about consequences. Not just whether they win the moment, but whether they can defend it later. The lead officer tried to downplay it. He acted like showing the warrant wasn't something he had to do right then. He treated the demand like it was a misunderstanding of procedure. He kept stretching time, hoping Robert would eventually step outside just to end the tension. Robert didn't move. He kept the focus on one point. If they had a warrant, they could show it. If they didn't, they needed to explain what authority they were using to aim weapons at his home at 2 a.m. The officers started splitting into two groups without saying it out loud. One group stayed locked into the control the suspect mindset, still aggressive, still insisting the family had to come out. The other group started looking around and checking details, like they were suddenly worried the whole scene was built on a mistake. That second group included the sergeant. The sergeant's voice got quieter. His eyes moved differently. He started checking things that should have been checked before anyone touched the property, like the visible house number, the mailbox, the curb markings, the way the street numbers lined up. Robert noticed that shift right away because he knew what it meant. It meant someone in charge was finally doing the verification that should have happened before a single weapon came up. Still, the lead officer kept trying to force a win. He implied Robert was making himself look guilty by insisting on the warrant. He implied Robert was creating a bigger problem. He implied they could make the night harder if Robert didn't do what they wanted. Nia didn't react emotionally because that's what pressure tactics want. She kept it simple. Show the warrant. And after enough stalling, the officers finally produced it. Not confidently. Not like it was routine. More like they were hoping the paper itself would end the conversation before anyone could read it carefully. Robert and Nia didn't let that happen. They focused on the parts that matter: the address, the target, the legal basis. Nia prioritized the address immediately because that's the most common point of failure in wrong house situations. Robert scanned for identifiers that would confirm whether the warrant matched their home, their names, anything that could justify what was happening. It took seconds. The address didn't match. This wasn't a technicality. It wasn't a typo that still landed on the same property. It was a different home, wrong house, wrong family, wrong baby in a man's arms while rifles were angled toward the doorway. The air shifted so fast it was obvious even from inside. Officers who had been loud suddenly got quieter. Officers who were barking commands started glancing at each other. The lead officer's posture changed, not because he suddenly respected the family, but because he realized he was standing in front of multiple security cameras while holding a warrant for someone else's address. Nia made the reality unavoidable by pointing out the cameras again, this time more directly. She indicated where they were mounted and what angles they covered. She didn't need to threaten anyone. The cameras were already doing the work. One officer, not thinking fast enough to keep his reaction private, said out loud that they were going to get in serious trouble. It wasn't said to intimidate the family. It came out like panic. And that moment mattered because it showed the truth. They knew this wasn't defensible. Now the lead officer shifted into damage control. Instead of acting like Robert was a suspect who needed to be ordered around, he started acting like the whole thing was a misunderstanding that could be smoothed over. He tried to calm the moment without admitting what it really was. He tried to make it smaller than it was. Robert didn't allow that either. He stayed calm and he stayed precise, but he became even more structured. He asked for names and badge numbers. He asked who authorized the operation. He asked who signed off on the address verification. He asked who the supervising sergeant was. He asked how this was going to be documented and what report number would exist by morning. The officers didn't like those questions because those questions turn a mistake into a paper trail. The sergeant tried to take over. He tried to do the things supervisors do when a scene goes bad. Lower volume, reduce exposure, move everyone back, stop the bleeding. He told his people to step back and start clearing. But stepping back didn't erase what already happened, and everyone knew it. Robert didn't chase them outside. He didn't step into the yard. He didn't give them the chance to claim he approached aggressively or failed to follow directions. He kept the family inside and kept the boundary intact. At the same time, he made sure the record was protected. He told Nia to make sure the footage was saved and backed up. Not just kept, but exported, duplicated, and stored somewhere outside the camera system. Because he knew how often people lose footage later through glitches, overwrites, and convenient technical problems. Nia moved like someone who had already decided this wasn't ending with an apology. She secured the video and then started documenting everything else: time of arrival, number of officers, weapons drawn, commands given, the delay before producing the warrant, and the moment the address mismatch was discovered. Outside, the officers were now doing what they should have done before showing up, confirming the correct location. You could see it in their movements: more radio traffic, more looking at street numbers, more walking down to check the next house, more back and forth between vehicles. It was sloppy and it was obvious. They weren't executing a planned, verified warrant at this point. They were trying to figure out where they were supposed to be after they already terrified the wrong family. A neighbor across the street had started watching, like most people do when flashing lights hit a quiet neighborhood. That neighbor would later confirm what the Reeds already knew. The officers had arrived with certainty, escalated immediately, and only started checking details after getting challenged and recorded. The lead officer tried one more time to regain control of the narrative. He tried to frame it like the Reeds had complicated things. He implied it would have been easier if Robert had just come outside. Robert shut that down by sticking to facts and process. He made it clear the officers were the ones who escalated without explaining. They were the ones who delayed presenting the warrant. They were the ones who pressured a family instead of verifying the address. And they were the ones now retreating because the document in their own hands proved they were in the wrong place. No yelling, no grandstanding, just a calm statement of what happened. The officers eventually cleared out from the Reeds' property, not with confidence, not with a clean ending, but with the kind of rushed withdrawal people do when they realize every extra second is another piece of footage. And when the last vehicle pulled away, the Reeds didn't relax. They shifted into the next phase. Robert and Nia knew what usually happens after a major police mistake. First comes a soft apology, then a vague explanation, then a report that tries to justify escalation, then a suggestion that everyone should just move on. So they treated the night like evidence, not like an incident. Robert started contacting the right people immediately. He documented the officer's agency, the time, and the basic facts. He prepared to file formal complaints the way he'd advise anyone else to do, except he also knew how internal systems work, and how quickly details can get cleaned up in writing if nobody challenges them early. Nia stayed focused on protecting the video record and preparing a clean timeline, because timelines beat opinions every time. By morning, the Reeds weren't asking for someone to say sorry. They were preparing to force accountability, and that's where the city made its next mistake. Because instead of owning what happened immediately, the first official responses came wrapped in excuses and minimization. Like, this was just a small mix-up. The Reeds weren't going to let it be treated like that. By the next afternoon, the Reeds had already done the part most people don't do fast enough. They locked down the record before anyone could reshape it. Robert pulled the camera footage from every angle. Front door, driveway, side yard, audio, timestamps. Nia built a clean timeline with exact times and what was happening at each point. Not feelings, not opinions, just sequence. Then Robert did what he knew would matter later. He reported the incident up his own chain and contacted the local agency's command staff, formally with documentation. He didn't call to yell. He called to create a trail that couldn't disappear. The first response they got was what you'd expect from a system trying to reduce damage, a vague acknowledgement, a tone that suggested it was an unfortunate situation, a push to handle it quietly. But the Reeds weren't playing quiet, because this wasn't a misunderstanding at a traffic stop. This was multiple armed officers at the wrong house in the middle of the night, trying to pressure a family outside before showing the warrant, while the baby was in Robert's arms. And the biggest issue wasn't only the wrong address, it was the behavior after they got there. The pressure, the escalation, the refusal to show paperwork, while trying to control the scene with fear. That's what internal investigators would later focus on, because that's the part that turns a mistake into misconduct. The footage started moving through the usual channels. First family, then trusted friends, then legal review. Then journalists started asking questions. Not because people love drama, but because the video showed something a lot of viewers recognized. The system betting that a citizen won't know how to slow things down. This time, the citizens did. Robert filed a lawsuit. Not as a flex, not as revenge, but as a forced accountability mechanism. The suit wasn't just about emotional harm. It was about the unlawful entry risk, the escalation, and the tactics used to push compliance without legal transparency. The city tried to manage it at first. When agencies get caught, the first goal is usually to protect the institution. Limit statements, control language, avoid admitting fault. That approach didn't work here, because the footage in the warrant spoke louder than any press release. Internal investigators were pulled in. They reviewed the timeline, the decision-making, and the lead officer's choices. And their conclusion cut through the excuses. The entry approach and the escalation were unjustified. That finding mattered more than an apology because it removed the usual cover story. It meant the problem wasn't only a bad address. It was how the officers acted once they were on scene, and how quickly they tried to bully procedure out of the way. The lead officer was fired, and the city settled the lawsuit for $4 million. That number wasn't about getting rich. Settlements like that are what happens when a government entity knows a jury will see the video, see the baby, see the warrant mismatch, and see the pressure tactics. Cities pay to stop the bleeding. They pay because the record is too clear. Now here's where the clip that inspired this story made a point that hit hard. It compared what happened to another incident that looked different on the surface, but had the same root problem. In Pasco County, Florida, deputies showed up to finalize an eviction. Same basic failure mode. They confused the house number. They went to the wrong home. They drilled out the lock and started forcing entry before they realized the address didn't match. Different scenario, same pattern. Authority moved first, verification came later. And that's the part people keep missing. These aren't just oops moments. They're systems that train speed and control, then act surprised when speed and control replace accuracy. For the Reeds, the aftermath wasn't just news clips and paperwork. It changed how they lived. They upgraded their camera storage and set backups that didn't rely on one device. They added visible signage and stronger lighting, not because signs stop raids, but because anything that strengthens the record increases accountability. They also became the example people used quietly in conversations that used to end with, "There's nothing you can do." And if you're watching this thinking about what you would do at 2 a.m., with a door full of guns and a baby in your house, that's the real question. Would you know how to slow the scene down without making it worse? Would you know how to protect yourself and still protect the record? Drop in the comments what you would have done. And if you've ever seen authority make a mistake and then try to act like you're the problem for noticing. Share the story with someone who thinks cameras don't matter and paperwork isn't power. And subscribe for more story times where accountability actually catches up